The North Star contract was in a blue folder with a coffee stain on the cover from the night Julian, and I signed it at our kitchen table. I opened to section 7.4. The language was dry, but it hit my body like a door locking from the inside. For 8 years. Inside, I could see the cleaning crew moving through the lobby and the reflection of our company name on the glass. When I touched my badge to the reader, the light flashed red. Not yellow. Not delayed. Red. For a second I thought the system was down because that was always my first instinct. If something broke, I fixed it. I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. Then Marcy from operations came through the door with a cardboard box in her hands and looked at me like she already knew what was waiting upstairs. She did not say good morning. She said very quietly, "Nora, HR is in conference room 3. My husband was already sitting there when I walked in. David had chosen the chair at the head of the table, the one clients used to face when they visited. Beside him sat an HR consultant I had never hired. A woman with a beige folder and the careful voice people use when they have been paid to make cruelty sound procedural. David did not look embarrassed. That hurt more than the folder. I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself." He folded his hands and said, "We need clean leadership before the Astor Ridge close." Astor Ridge was not just a client. It was the client. Their contract would carry half our payroll for the next 18 months. I waited for him to explain the joke, the misunderstanding, the temporary optics. He slid the folder toward me. My name was on the first lease. My handwriting was on the first client onboarding checklist. My emergency savings had paid our first payroll. I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. But the letter in front of me described me as a redundant operations role. David watched my face and mistook my silence for weakness. "Please do not make this harder," he said. "The company needs stability." The word company landed between us like an object he believed belonged only to him. I signed nothing in that room. I took the packet, asked for copies of every document referenced in it, and stood up. I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. No one stopped me when I walked to my office. That was how I knew the decision had been prepared for days. My email was locked. My calendar had vanished. My client folders were gone from the shared drive. The plant on my windowsill was still alive, which felt almost insulting. I packed my framed photo from our first office, 2 notebooks, and the mug that said "Ship Clean Work." In the parking garage with the box balanced against my hip, my phone buzzed. I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. The message came from Elise Grant, the procurement director at Astor Ridge. It said, "Nora, before we execute final documents, our counsel needs your confirmation and signature. Are you available today?" I read it 3 times. Then David texted me, "Do not answer them. We need to talk first." I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. That was when the shock finally cleared enough for me to see the shape of what he had forgotten. Chapter 2. The company was supposed to be ours. 8 years earlier, Voss Meridian had been 2 laptops, a folding table, and a spreadsheet I built while David practiced investor language in the mirror. He was good in rooms. I will give him that. He could make a client feel like the future had arrived early and he had brought it in his briefcase. What he could not do was make the future run on Tuesday morning when invoices were late, servers failed, and a warehouse manager needed an answer before sunrise. That was my part. I built the delivery system, the escalation rules, the approval chain, and the boring controls that made large clients trust us. In the beginning, David knew that. He used to bring me coffee at midnight and say, "I can sell it because you make it true." I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. The sentence became less tender as the years passed. First he stopped saying it in public. Then he stopped saying it at all. Astor Ridge entered our life during year 3, when we were still renting 2 rooms above a dental office. Their pilot had gone badly under another vendor, and their legal team was suspicious of every promise. David gave the polished pitch. I answered every operational question. When their director asked who could guarantee continuity if leadership changed, David smiled and said, "Nora owns implementation." I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. Their counsel asked for that in writing. That was how my name became more than a job title. The operating agreement was amended to list me as an authorized signatory for client delivery obligations above a threshold. It sounded technical. It was practical. Astor Ridge did not want performance guarantees from a salesman. They wanted them from the person who built the system. For years, that clause sat inside a binder with old lease documents and bank letters. David forgot it because he never respected the work that made it necessary. I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. I remembered it because I had fought for every sentence. By the time we moved into the glass office, the marriage had learned to imitate the company. David stood in front. I kept things from falling apart. Employees thanked him at holiday dinners and called me when payroll exports failed. Clients sent him gifts and sent me urgent screenshots. I told myself it was fine. I told myself visibility was not the same as value. I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. That lie worked until the morning he used invisibility as evidence that I could be removed. Sitting in my car after the firing, I opened the cloud folder where I kept scans of our old agreements. There it was. Section 9.4. Authorized signatory, client continuity and delivery assurance. My name was still there. The company could terminate my employment. It had not removed my contractual authority. I remember that detail because the first hour of a betrayal does strange things to memory. It sharpens objects and dulls explanations. A badge, a folder, a subject line, a chair left empty. Those were the pieces I could hold while the rest of my life rearranged itself. That difference was small enough for David to miss and large enough to change everything. Chapter 3. He removed everything except my name. I did not answer Elise immediately. I also did not answer David. Instead, I drove to the public library 2 blocks from my apartment and used a study room with a door that clicked shut. My hands were shaking too much for strategy, so I started with inventory. Email access disabled at 6:58. Calendar disabled at 7:02. Payroll dashboard removed at 7:04. Client implementation folder transferred to David's executive group at 7:10. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. The termination meeting had started at 7:30. That meant the system removals were not a consequence of the meeting. They were preparation for it. I took screenshots from my personal notification backups, exported what I legally had access to, and wrote down times before anger could blur them. Marcy texted me 20 minutes later. "I am sorry. He told IT last Friday. HR paperwork arrived this morning." I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. I stared at that message until the meaning settled. Last Friday, David had taken me to dinner. He had ordered wine. He had touched my wrist and asked if I was excited for the Astor Ridge Close. While I talked about staffing needs, he had already started removing me. The cruelty of that did not make him foolish. It made him confident. He believed the company story belonged to whoever controlled the accounts. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. At 10:12, Elise called. I let it ring twice, then answered with my professional voice because habit is sometimes stronger than heartbreak. "This is Nora," Elise said. "I am sorry to call your personal number. We received revised terms this morning, and counsel has questions only you can answer." I did not tell her I had been fired. I asked her to send the questions in writing. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. There was a pause. "Nora," she said, "are you still authorized to sign delivery assurance documents for Voss Meridian?" I looked at the scanned agreement on the library computer. "As far as the current executed documents show," I said. "Yes, but I need all communication in writing." She exhaled like someone had just confirmed a suspicion. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. "Then I will send the packet to you directly." When the email arrived, the subject line was enough to make my stomach tighten. Astor Ridge final close. Signatory confirmation required. The attachment showed the signature block David needed. Mine. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. Below it was a revised obligation schedule I had never approved. David had stripped out 2 quality control checkpoints and a staffing reserve, probably to make margins look better. He had fired the person responsible for those controls and then tried to close the deal without them. That was no longer only a marital betrayal. It was operational risk. And now the client knew it. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. Chapter 4. The client wanted a witness. At 11:30, David called 9 times. I listened to none of the calls, but I saved every voicemail. The first 2 were controlled. He said we had to present a united front and that I did not understand the pressure from investors. By the 4th, his voice had sharpened. You are still listed because the lawyers are slow, he said. Do not embarrass us by pretending this gives you power. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. That sentence told me he knew about the clause. He had not forgotten it entirely. He had assumed I would treat it like a technicality because he had trained me to protect the company from his mistakes. I forwarded nothing to anyone yet. Instead, I called an employment and business attorney whose card had been sitting in my desk drawer since a vendor dispute 3 years earlier. Her name was Lena Ortiz. She listened without interrupting, which made me trust her faster than I expected. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. When I finished, she asked only 3 questions. Do you own equity? Yes. Was your signatory authority formally removed? Not in any document I have seen. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. Has anyone asked you to sign privately after termination? I looked at David's latest text. Come home. We can fix this tonight. Bring the packet. Yes, I said. Lena's voice became very calm. Do not sign anything at home. Do not threaten him. Do not accuse him in writing. Ask for a witnessed meeting with counsel and the client. If the client needs your signature, they can put the request through proper channels. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. I almost laughed because proper channels were exactly what David had spent our marriage asking me to build and then resenting me for enforcing. Lena drafted a 3-paragraph response while I sat in the library study room. It said I was available to discuss signatory authority and delivery obligations in a witnessed meeting. It requested the current operating documents, board authorization for any leadership changes affecting the Astor Ridge contract, and written confirmation of the revised quality controls. It did not mention betrayal. It did not mention marriage. It did not mention the fact that I had cried in a parking garage 20 minutes earlier. That restraint felt like swallowing glass. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. But when the email went out, the reaction was immediate. Elise replied first. Thank you. We will pause execution pending meeting. Then David texted. What did you do? I finally answered him. I asked for the same documentation I would require from anyone. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. He wrote back, You are making this personal. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I put the phone face down and started building a folder called Evidence. Chapter 5. Dinner with a folder between us. David came home that night with flowers, which told me he was afraid. He had not brought flowers after my mother's surgery, after our 5th anniversary, or after the first time I found out he had presented my implementation plan as his solo strategy. But he brought them the night a client paused a contract. I left them on the counter and sat at the dining table. He placed a blue folder between us. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. "This got out of hand," he said. That was another phrase he used when consequences reached him. I asked whether he had authorized IT to remove my access before the termination meeting. He rubbed his forehead. "The timing is not the point." "It is exactly the point." I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. "Nora, we needed decisive leadership." Astor Ridge was nervous. Investors were nervous. You get emotional about process. I looked at the folder. "And yet the process is why they want my signature." His mouth tightened. For the first time all day, he seemed less angry than trapped. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. "Sign this tonight. Tomorrow I will tell HR we are restructuring the separation as a leave. You can consult through the transition." It sounded generous only if I ignored the fact that he had fired me that morning. I asked for reinstated system access, correction of the changed client terms, board acknowledgement of my authority, and a witness. He laughed once, sharp and ugly. "You think one signature makes you CEO?" I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. "No," I said. "I think one signature makes me responsible for what happens after I sign." He leaned back as if I had said something unreasonable. "If this deal collapses, 34 employees suffer. Is that what you want? To punish me by hurting them?" That was the hook he expected to work. For years, employee welfare had been the leash he could pull whenever I objected to how he treated me. I kept returning to the second, the foundation after facts first, slant in the floor. Julian looked at me then, not at Rebecca, smaller. Words appear. "You were undermining me for my story to twist. By reading contract move. If you were worried about employees, they were dependent on a process. They asked for you. Because I kept the process honest." His attorney whispered something urgent. Julian ignored him. "You loved being indispensable." That one hurt because it turning to the same rule Lena. I did love being needed. I loved solving problems before they became disasters. I loved the relief on a superintendent's face when I found the clause or the permit or the email thread that kept a job from collapsing. "You made HR tell me I was redundant." The room went very quiet. He left the folder on the table when he walked out. I photographed every page before I slept. Chapter 6. The evidence was in the work. The next morning I did the kind of work no one claps for. I made a timeline. Not a dramatic one. A useful one. Friday at 4:32, David requested IT access changes. Monday at 6:58, my email was disabled. Monday at 7:30, HR delivered the termination letter. Tuesday at 9:04, Astor Ridge paused execution because revised delivery controls did not match the original commitment. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. Beside each entry I placed proof, screenshot, email header, attachment version, voicemail timestamp, witness name. Then I opened the old onboarding deck. Slide 12 still had my note in the margin. No executive override on quality gates without signatory approval. I remembered writing it after a late-night crisis when David had promised a client something our team could not safely deliver. Back then he apologized. He said he needed my judgment. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. Now the same judgment was the obstacle he wanted removed. Lena reviewed the packet and made me remove half my adjectives. Your anger is valid, she said. It is also not evidence. That sentence annoyed me, then saved me. By noon we had a clean binder. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. Operating agreement. Signatory clause. Original *rich delivery schedule. Revised schedule. Access removal timeline. Termination packet. Client email. Lena sent a formal meeting request to David, the board chair, and *rich counsel. The reply from the board chair arrived first. His name was Malcolm Reed, and he had always treated me like the person who made David's ideas billable. Nora, he wrote, I was not aware your access was removed before today's board discussion. We need to understand the sequence. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. There it was, the first crack in David's version. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired in a way sleep could not fix. That night, David did not come home. He sent one text from a hotel. You are burning down everything we built. I kept returning to the same rule Lena had given me. Facts first, feelings second, decisions last. That order did not make the hurt smaller. It made the next step possible without giving David another story to twist. I opened the evidence folder and looked at the first lease we had both signed. No, I thought. I was finally refusing to hold the match for him. Chapter 7, The Empty Chair. The meeting happened in the *Ridge legal office because their counsel refused to come to ours. That detail mattered. David liked rooms where he controlled the seating, the glass walls, the coffee, the introductions. At *Ridge, he was a guest. Elise sat across from me with two lawyers. Malcolm joined from our board. Lena sat beside me with a yellow legal pad and a calm face. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. David arrived 7 minutes late and tried to kiss my cheek in the hallway. I stepped back. His smile hardened, then returned when the door opened. The first 20 minutes were technical. That helped. Elise asked who had authority to approve removal of Quality Gate 3. David began answering. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. She looked at me instead. Nora. I explained the gate, the staffing reserve, and the reason the client had required dual approval after leadership changes. I did not say David had lied. I said the revised document did not match the approved delivery model. Lena placed the signatory clause on the table. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. Then Malcolm asked David a simple question. Why was Nora's access removed before HR met with her? David adjusted his cuff. Operational security during transition. Who approved the transition? Malcolm asked. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. David looked at me like I had betrayed him by letting the question exist. He said, "I did." The silence after that was not dramatic. It was administrative, which made it worse. People wrote things down. Elise opened another folder. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. David, you represented last week that Nora had voluntarily stepped back from delivery leadership. Is that still your statement? My termination packet lay on the table between us. For the first time, his confidence failed in front of other people. The language may have been imprecise, he said. I looked at the glass wall and saw my own reflection. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. I did not look victorious. I looked like a woman finally sitting in the room where her work had always been discussed without her. Elise turned to me. If governance protections are restored, are you willing to sign the corrected package? David inhaled sharply. I said, I am willing to discuss conditions. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. Chapter 8. I did not sign for him. The conditions were simple because good boundaries usually audit sat open. So the lawyers did what lawyers do when everyone has leverage and nobody has clean hands. They built a room where consequences could become numbers. My final settlement had 5 essential terms. Ellis Rowan bought my 43% ownership interest for $2.85 million, paid over 18 months with bank-backed security. My personnel file was corrected to state that my employment ended without cause after an ownership dispute, not for What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. 5. No private signature request, no unsigned side promise, no marital pressure disguised as company urgency. David called the list hostile. Elise called it consistent with the original risk plan. Malcolm asked for a private board session. David objected immediately. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. You cannot remove me from a discussion about my own company. Malcolm's face did not change. We are discussing authorization you appear to have misrepresented. That sentence did what my anger could not. It placed the issue where it belonged. Not in our kitchen. Not in our marriage. In the documents. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. The board session took 43 minutes. I sat in a smaller conference room with Lena while David paced outside the glass door. At one point he stopped and looked at me through the wall. There was a time when that look would have made me soften. I would have remembered the folding table, the late coffee, the first client celebration in a parking lot because we could not afford dinner. I did remember those things. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. I also remembered the red keycard reader. When Malcolm returned, his voice was careful. The board is removing David from unilateral authority over the Astor Ridge account pending review. Nora, we are prepared to restore your project access today under council supervision. David said my name like a warning. I did not answer him. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. Elise slid the corrected package across the table. The signature line waited for me, exactly where he had thought he could force me to appear. Picked up the pen. Then I set it down. I will sign after the written correction states that my prior removal was not voluntary and after payroll protection is attached. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. No one called that emotional. No one called that difficult. They added the language. Chapter 9. The person who kept receipts. By the time I signed, the room felt less like a confrontation and more like an audit. That was how I knew I had chosen the right path. Revenge, if it is going to last longer than a moment, needs paperwork. I signed the corrected delivery assurance. I signed the governance acknowledgement. I signed the transition schedule that gave the client direct access to me for 90 days. David signed only after Malcolm told him refusal would trigger an emergency board vote. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. His hand shook more than mine. The Astor Ridge contract closed at 4:22 that afternoon. Payroll cleared the next Friday. The company did not collapse. The employees did not suffer because I refused to sign in a kitchen. That fact became important later because David tried to tell people I had almost destroyed everything. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. Marcy forwarded me a screenshot of an internal message he posted before the board removed his admin rights. It said leadership had successfully navigated a temporary governance disruption. I almost replied. Instead, I sent the screenshot to Lena and added it to the folder. Receipts had become less satisfying and more necessary. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. Over the next week, the board interviewed employees about the access removals and the changed client terms. One junior analyst admitted David had asked him to rebuild the delivery dashboard without my approval chain. A project manager confirmed she was told to stop copying me on Astor Ridge updates 2 days before my firing. None of them sounded heroic. They sounded scared. That made me sadder than I expected. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. A workplace becomes unhealthy long before the first obvious injury. People learn which truths cost too much to say. The board offered me 2 options. I could return as interim chief operating officer through the Astor Ridge launch, with authority documented and reviewed every quarter. Or I could accept a protected buyout plus a paid transition role. David wanted me to choose the buyout. I knew because he said nothing. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. I chose interim control. Not because I wanted to sit in his chair. Because I wanted the people who had depended on my quiet work to see that quiet work was not disposable. Chapter 10. The signature that ended the marriage. The marriage ended before the paperwork did. That is one of the things people do not understand about endings. The legal date is rarely the real one. For me, the real ending was not the termination letter. It was not the board meeting. It was not even David asking for my signature after firing me. It was the moment he realized the company would survive under conditions he did not control, and looked more offended by that than by losing me. 2 weeks after the contract closed, he came to the apartment while I was sorting files at the dining table. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. He looked exhausted. I was not immune to that. I made mistakes, he said. I waited. But you humiliated me. There it was. The apology with its spine removed. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. I asked him what part had humiliated him. The client asking questions, the board reading documents, or me refusing to sign privately. He said, "You could have protected me." I looked at the wedding photo still face down on the shelf. For years, protecting him had meant absorbing impact, explaining delays, softening his promises, repairing his relationships, translating his ambition into something real. The day I stopped absorbing impact, he called it betrayal. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. I removed my wedding ring and placed it beside the corrected governance agreement. The symbolism was obvious enough to feel almost cheap, but I did it anyway because some objects need to sit next to the truth. I did protect something, I said. The contract, the employees, my name, the work. He looked at the ring and then at me. So that is it? What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. That was it when you fired me and asked me to save you by pretending you had not. He left without the folder. A month later, the board completed its review. David lost executive authority and moved into a non-operational advisory role, while his shares were negotiated. People wanted me to be happier about that. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. I was relieved, not happy. There is a difference. Happy is light. Relief is weight finally leaving your chest. Chapter 11. My name stayed where it belonged. The Astor Ridge launch happened on a rainy Thursday. There were no champagne towers, no dramatic speeches, no courtroom gasp. There was a conference bridge that started on time, a dashboard that stayed green, and a client director who said, "This is what we expected from you." That sentence nearly broke me because it was so ordinary. For years, I had wanted David to say something like that and mean it. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. In the end, it came from the client whose contract he tried to use as my leash. After the launch, I walked through the office while people pretended not to watch me. Marcy hugged me near the supply closet and then apologized for hugging me at work. I laughed for the first time in weeks. My access card worked. The light turned green. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. Over the next year, I negotiated a clean separation of ownership and started a smaller operations firm with 2 people who had left after the review. Astor Ridge became one of our first clients after their transition period ended. David sent one long apology email 6 months later. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. It was better than the first attempt. It named some facts. It avoided some excuses. I did not answer immediately. Then I wrote back one paragraph. I hope you keep learning from what happened. I am not available to help you repair the story you told yourself. That was the last sentence I ever wrote to him about our marriage. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. People ask whether I got revenge. I understand why. The shape looks like revenge from the outside. He fired me. The client needed my signature. I used that signature to force consequences. But from inside the story it felt simpler and harder. I stopped rescuing the person who had mistaken my loyalty for permission. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. I let documents say what my voice had been trained to soften. I made sure the people depending on the work were protected, including me. On the morning I left Voss Meridian for the last time, I placed my old keycard on the reception desk. The new one for my own firm was already in my bag. Outside, the glass doors reflected the city waking up. What changed then was not my anger. Anger had been there from the beginning. What changed was the place I allowed it to sit. I stopped putting it in messages, apologies, and private arguments. I put it into boundaries that other people could verify. I thought about the first red light on the reader and the panic it had caused. Then I walked through a different door. One that opened because I had built the life on the other side myself. Chapter 12. The review no one wanted. The first board review after David lost authority was scheduled for 9 in the morning. I arrived at 8:30 because I wanted the room empty before it became crowded with history. The conference table had been polished. Someone had placed new water bottles at every seat. The screen showed the Astor Ridge Project dashboard with green indicators and the kind of clean numbers David used to love when he could stand beside them. I stood at the end of the table and let myself remember the first time he and I had practiced a client presentation in a motel room because we could not afford a proper trip. Back then, I believed exhaustion was proof that we were building something noble. Sometimes exhaustion is only exhaustion. Sometimes loyalty is only a habit you learned before you knew what it cost. Malcolm arrived first. He carried a folder thick enough to make the morning feel official before anyone spoke. He said, "This will be uncomfortable." I said, "It should be." That was not bitterness. It was accuracy. Comfort had protected the wrong things for too long. Comfortable silence had let David turn my work into his brand. Comfortable compromise had let the board treat my authority as useful but invisible. Comfortable marriage had let me explain away things I should have named years earlier. The review began with facts. Astor Ridge stayed. Payroll cleared. The removed quality gates were restored. The client satisfaction report improved after direct operational access returned. Then came the part David hated. The board reviewed the access timeline, the revised terms, and the representation that I had voluntarily stepped back. David sat across from me with his jaw set. He looked smaller without the ability to control the room, which made me sad in a way I did not want to admit. Lena did not let me soften. When Malcolm asked whether I believed the misrepresentation had harmed the company, I answered the question. Yes. It put the client relationship at risk, it created internal confusion, and it used my termination to conceal a governance problem. David looked at me as if I had struck him, but I had spent years protecting him from precise language. I was done paying that tax. The review ended with 3 actions. David would resign from operational leadership immediately. His equity would be handled through a negotiated separation. The board would commission an outside audit of signatory authority, executive approvals, and client risk controls across all major accounts. No one clapped. No one shouted. No one slammed a door. The consequence arrived in minutes, signatures, and revised permissions. That was the part of the story I wish more people understood. Real consequences rarely look like movie revenge. They look like a password that stops working, a title removed from a directory, a meeting invite that no longer includes you, a decision written clearly enough that no one can pretend later it was only emotion. After the meeting, David waited in the hall. He said, "You got what you wanted." I looked through the glass at the table where I had just told the truth in complete sentences. "No," I said. "I got what was documented." He laughed without humor. "You always hide behind paperwork." That time the insult did not reach me. "Paperwork is what people use when memory becomes convenient," I said. He had no answer for that. Chapter 13: What Employees Remember. The strangest part of returning to operational control was how carefully people behaved around me. They were not cold. They were cautious. Every conversation began with too much politeness. Every hallway quieted half a second too late. People asked whether I needed anything as if I had come back from surgery instead of a board review. First it irritated me. Then Marcy closed my office door and said, "They are afraid you blame them." I wanted to say I did not, but that would have been too easy. Some of them had known pieces. Some had stayed silent because David signed their checks. Some had watched him remove me one permission at a time and decided the safest place was out of the way. I understood that. Understanding is not the same as pretending nothing happened. So I called a staff meeting and kept it short. "No one here is required to take sides in my marriage," I said. "But everyone here is required to follow documented controls. If a process can be overridden by fear of one executive, it is not a process. It is theater." People looked down at notebooks and laptops. I continued. "The Astor Ridge account will have written escalation rules. Client commitments will be visible to the team responsible for delivering them. No one will be punished for asking for an approval path in writing." A junior analyst named Priya raised her hand. She was the one who had been asked to rebuild the dashboard without my approval chain. "What if the request comes from the top?" she asked. I looked around the room. "Then the top can write it down." That sentence changed the air. It did not heal everything, but it gave people a tool. Over the next month, the company became less dramatic and more honest. That sounds dull. It was wonderful. Problems reached meetings earlier. Commitments became more specific. People stopped asking in whispers whether David had approved something and started asking where the approval lived. Astor Ridge noticed. Elise sent a note after the second weekly review. It said, "This feels like the original team again." I printed the note and put it in the evidence folder, then laughed at myself. Not every receipt needed to be a weapon. Some could be reminders. I thought about how many years I had spent making someone else's confidence look like competence. "Send me a scope," I said. The first proposal for my new firm was written at my kitchen table, the same table where David had tried to pressure me into signing privately. This time the folder between me and the future belonged to me. I named the firm Meridian Controls for exactly 1 day, then deleted the word Meridian because I realized I was still trying to carry proof from the old life into the new one. The final name was Northline Operations. It was plain. It was clean. Sounded like a direction. Marcy became my first hire after she gave proper notice. Priya joined 6 weeks later. We did not leave in a dramatic wave. We left correctly. Sign notices, transition memos, client conflict checks, final access confirmations. I had learned the value of clean exits. David called when he heard about the firm. I let it go to voicemail. His message was quiet. "You are really going to compete with me?" That question told me he still did not understand. I was not competing with him. I was finally working without converting my value into his reputation first. Northline's first office was smaller than the first room David and I had rented years earlier. The carpet was ugly. The windows faced a parking lot. The coffee machine made a sound like it was losing an argument. I loved it. On the first morning, I taped a note inside the supply cabinet where only our tiny team would see it. Write it down. Tell the truth early. No one gets erased. It was not a slogan. It was a repair. Chapter 15, The Last Packet. The divorce packet arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in a white envelope with my name typed slightly off-center. I expected to feel something sharp. Instead, I felt the tiredness that comes when a long noise finally stops. The terms were not romantic, but they were fair. Separate homes. Separate equity. No claim to Northline. No public statements about the company review beyond agreed language. Lena had done her job well. David included a handwritten note inside the packet. For several minutes I only looked at the folded paper. There had been a time when his handwriting could change my entire day. A grocery list, a card, a sticky note on my laptop that said "brilliant work," and then his handwriting had moved to signatures I was supposed to rescue. Initials on decisions he had made without me. Notes on documents that turned my role into an inconvenience. I opened it anyway. The note said, "I know I made you feel replaceable. I think I needed you to be replaceable so I could believe I had become enough without you." It was the closest he had come to telling the truth. I sat with that for a long time. Then I placed the note in a folder separate from the evidence folder. Some papers belonged to consequences. Some belonged to grief. I signed the divorce documents the next morning. There was no music. No storm. No dramatic hesitation above the line. Just my name, written by my own hand, on a document that did not save him, punish him, or explain me. It simply ended what had already ended. That afternoon, I walked past the old Voss Meridian building on my way to a client meeting. The glass doors reflected a woman in a cream coat carrying a laptop bag and a coffee she had bought for herself. For a second I saw the woman from the parking garage, holding a box and trying not to fall apart. I wanted to tell her that she would not get all of herself back at once. She would get herself back in clauses, choices, invoices, meetings, mornings. She would get herself back each time she refused to confuse being needed with being loved. Chapter 16. The Door That Opened. 1 year after the firing, Astor Ridge invited Northline to present at their vendor summit. I stood on a small stage in a navy dress and talked about governance controls for complex service contracts. It sounds boring when I say it that way. It was not boring to me. Every slide represented a lesson I had paid for in private before I learned to price it in public. After the presentation, a woman approached me near the coffee table. She was younger than me, maybe 30, with a conference badge turned backward and eyes that looked too familiar. She said, "My boss keeps asking me to approve things verbally. He says email makes everything slower." I could have given her a long answer. Instead, I gave her the one I wish someone had given me earlier. If writing it down would make him uncomfortable, you already know why he wants it verbal. She nodded once and her eyes filled. I handed her my card. Not because I wanted a client, because I recognized the moment before someone learns to distrust their own caution. That evening, I returned to my office after everyone had gone home. The city lights were reflected in the window, and for once the reflection did not feel like a test. On my desk was a framed copy of Northline's first signed client agreement. My signature sat at the bottom. No one had begged for it. No one had trapped me into it. No one had treated it like a tool they could borrow after discarding the hand that held the pen. I unlocked the drawer where I kept the old Voss Meridian keycard. The card was useless now. A rectangle of plastic tied to a door I no longer needed. For months I had kept it as proof of what happened. That night I took it out, placed it beside the shred bin and paused. Then I put it back in the drawer. Not every artifact has to be destroyed to lose power. Some can stay where they are, quiet and small, while you walk into rooms they can no longer keep you from entering. The next morning my new access card turned green before I even thought about it. I opened the door, stepped inside and started work.